Welcome to the Early Education Conversation, where we discuss the transformative power of early learning with thought leaders, educators, and community members.
Welcome to the Early Education Conversation podcast. Today, we're talking about leadership, identity, and the future of early learning. Not just through what we build, but how we think about it. My guest today is someone I'm grateful to call both a friend and, dare I say, a mentor in the space of all things tech and beyond. Sunil Gunderia, well, he's the founder and CEO of Mindset CoPilot and formerly the Chief of Innovation at Age of Learning, where he has helped scale innovative learning platforms for millions of children. When we bought my math academy and my reading academy to Palm Beach County, Sunil was like the mastermind behind all of this, right? Because I was that person, that timid person who was going, no technology with kids. And Sunil was going, wait, just try it, right? Just try it. So he played a really important role in helping me think probably more deeply about edtech research and how innovation can responsibly support early learning. So Sunil is someone who has led global innovation, built platforms adopted by millions of learners, and now has taken the biggest leap of all, starting something new. So Sunil, welcome to Early Learning Conversations. This conversation has been a long time coming. We've talked about this for a while, so I'm really excited that you are here because you're one of those people who, I want to say quietly, but you're not a quiet person, so we'll say quietly, shape the work we do in Palm Beach County, right? But before we get into all of that, let me talk a little bit about, what this work has been for you. And the first question I always want to ask you is, what does early learning mean to you?
Well, and thank you for that very kind introduction. And what early learning means to me has changed after the work we did in Palm Beach County, working with yourself, Aruna, your team, with Warren, and really looking at what was possible in models that I didn't even know that existed before working with the ELC. So to answer your question, early learning is best framed as the blueprint years. And then this is not just for the child, it's for society, it's for all of us. It's what gets drawn between in those early years determines our capacity or our future capacity of everything we're trying to build as a society. And right now, we're not giving the architects of that blueprint nearly enough support to draw it well. And I recall, when we had the Love to Learn summit that Palm Beach, the ELC hosted. What really stuck with me, one of the things that Isabel Howe said from Stanford, she talked about like every child being born as a billionaire. And what she was referring to is the 100 billion neurons that are ready for connection at birth for every child. And what varies isn't this potential, it's whether the adults around them can activate it. Howard Burson, in one of your earlier podcasts, talked about it as a foundation. And I think it's even that it's not just the foundation, it's actually, or the early learning is actually the blueprint for the foundations. If we get that wrong, there's really no amount of renovation that fixes the mistakes we've made. And investing in the blueprint is a proactive solution. Vance Lupe framed it well on your last podcast. Getting early childhood right enables everything that comes after. And the child who gets the blueprint right shows up to kindergarten, ready to learn, ready to relate, and ready to build. And the one who doesn't spends that next decade trying to recover ground that didn't have to be lost. So, it comes back down to the architects, the educators, and you and I have talked a lot about this. What are we doing for the teachers? Because every interaction at this age is instruction. We're wiring the brain for problem solving, persistence, self-confidence. These aren't just soft skills, they're neurobiological preconditions. Early learning educators are the architects of this blueprint. And what we owe them is how do we help them every day obtain the capacity and capability to operationalize the science that we know that works in every classroom, every day for every child. And that's really the gap I want to solve. It's the same logic we use for my math academy, my reading academy that we talked about it. But now we want to apply that to teachers, educators, let's give the architect the right tools at the right moment, calibrated to what is happening in their classroom, and we will move the outcomes. And we've proven it on the student side, so now we just have to get the educators there as well.
One of the things that really strikes me about the people who come on this podcast is that rarely are they really early educators, right? Or are they in the space of early learning necessarily? And so for you, I know you have an MBA. And so my question is, as I'm thinking through, how do these people find themselves in early learning in this space? What drew you to this work in this first place? And what's that thread that runs through everything you've built?
What drew me here, and I didn't know I'd get here. I'm an accidental advocate, and I got here because the evidence told me I should be here. As I got into the work of education, and you look at what research tells you, you look at what Nobel Prize economist James Heckman tells you about investing in early learning and kind of the individual and societal outcomes for high quality programs that not just change trajectory, but in terms of academics, but change them in terms of health outcomes, not only for themselves, but economic outcomes for their children. You're like, what the heck? And then you find out that this space is underinvested, very fragmented, and not served in a way that an infrastructure like this should be served. And you're like, that is an opportunity for someone that wants to do business, but wants to do it in a way that has a lot of societal value. You can't be helped but drawn to this space.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that because even in that story, I can already hear something that I think defines how you think, right? And I know you've said this before. You've said that, I remember when we first met, you said you were really not interested in technology for technology's sake, right? And I remember you saying that, and it struck me because, I viewed you as a tech person at that moment. So it seems though like you were interested in what technology could unlock in people. Right. And I want to hold on to that as we go through this conversation, because I think it explains a lot about the choices you've made. Let's go back a little bit to your time as the Chief Innovation Officer at Age of Learning. That for my listeners, it's the company behind ABC Mouse and the adaptive learning technology powering my Reading Academy and my Math Academy, which is a platform we use across our network of voluntary pre-kindergarten sites here in Palm Beach County. So from your seat leading innovation, what are we trying to solve for?
Yeah, so the story there is having a conversation with Doug Doring back in 2015. Doug was our CEO. I had come back from a conference and we were talking about ABC Mouse, and we were talking about NAEP scores and what's happening in fourth grade with 2/3 of our students, our children, our kids, so 4 million kids a year, not being proficient in reading and math at fourth grade. ABC Mouse was doing really well. And we had this conversation of like, great, we can have a successful business, but we're not fully solving this problem, which is how do we get more kids to proficiency in fourth grade in reading and math? And Doug said, how do we solve this, Sunil? And I said, I don't know, but but I'd love to try to find this out. And that's really where it started, this journey of like, working with really smart people who understood the research, that understood the different sciences that go into what constitutes learning, understanding what a scope and sequence looks like for learning, for reading and math, looking at ways to approach this innovation. Science really often, especially in a space like education, and it continues to evolve, but has a lot of the answers. We just haven't operationalized it in a way that made sense. And so From my former experience at Disney, I had worked in games, and one of the things that I was really interested in is like the application of game-based learning into a thoughtful research environment where we're looking at our young learners from a developmental perspective. We're looking at them from a behavioral perspective in terms of how do we motivate a child to learn. We're looking at it from a perspective of mastery. From Bloom's work back in the 80s, mastery-based learning was really effective. So we brought all those sciences into our platform, our personalized mastery learning platform. But that was just the start of the journey. Then we're like, what products go on there? Math and reading. So we're research-based, but how do we become evidence proven? And that's a separate part of the journey that led us to being able to come to you, Aruna, and being able to come to Warren and saying, look, we've seen our product be effective for students like those in Palm Beach. We've seen it work for them. So we think it's going to work for your students. But we're not just going to say we think it is. Let's work with you to do research studies to prove to you that that's the case. Because it is our responsibility not just to bring technology to the table. It's our responsibility to bring solutions to the table that use technology and that make a difference to students. And that's what we delivered.
We got a lot of pushback too, when people hear adaptive technology and they think the product is doing the teaching, right? And, that was never the vision for us. And, let me share a little bit about the Palm Beach side of the story that Sunil and I are talking about for you listening out there, because I think it's important for listeners to understand how this kind of partnership actually works when it's done right. We became the first county in Florida to deploy adaptive learning with pre-K students at scale. And back in before pre-COVID times, our readiness rate was about 55%. And after using my math and my reading academy, we jumped to 72%. And so in addition to all of that, we produced, I think it was 3 ESSA-validated studies, and ESSA-validated studies are really the gold standard for education research evidence. But what made those results, I think, possible wasn't just a strong product, right? It was that there was a person on the inside, you, right, who actually wanted
among many.
Sunil always says him and his team, who actually wanted to understand what was happening on the ground with real teachers and real children, right? So talk to me about this implementation piece, because I think that's where ed tech can go really wrong, right? The technology kind of lands in a classroom and then the people part gets skipped completely. And you talked about Isabel Howe, right? And she talks about the relationship. And we know when we're talking about early learners, relationship is key. So tell me a little bit about that.
It's essential. You hear a lot in the ed tech circles and educational technology generally about the 5% problem, that only some small percentage of kids are actually getting benefit from ed tech and tools in their classroom, and the failure to recognize the dynamic environment that educators operate within the classroom is an issue, and it's not just an issue; it's a failure point, I think, with a lot of ed tech that goes into classrooms, and it took more than a purchase decision to get the 25% improvement we saw for kids using my reading academy in VPK. It happened because the coordinated effort of our partnership of bringing the educators, bringing the executive directors across, the 200 plus centers on board, that this is going to make a difference for your students. This is going to move the needle for them. And this is how we know it is. And this is the support we're going to give you. And this is how we're going to make sure that you're able to get this up and running for all of your students. And in a way, not only not going to harm, but it's actually going to help, and it's going to move the needle. And then coming back to them and telling them they're the reason that those results happen. I mean, the software alone, without those educators and their belief and then their willingness to adopt it, and then they were seeing those changes, and that they, came back to us. And as much as it's important to get the ESSA validated studies, the surveys that came back from the teachers that they wanted the program in their classroom, that they saw the benefit to their students. They saw their students showing up in the classroom with self-identifying as readers and mathematicians and being engaged and confident in their skills. That's what is a great implementation, and that's what's going to move the needle.
Yeah, we certainly saw that, right? We certainly saw that needle move, and I think it's so important to align the early learning goals you have with the technology. It needs to be genuinely aligned. Is all ed tech the same?
Not all technology is the same, and I think where you're getting to, Aruna, is ed tech that is research based and really thoughtful in terms of what outcomes it wants to produce and how it's going to get there, and understanding what dosage or how much usage it requires to get there, is really important in terms of how you look at educational technology, how you look at anything. It should be based on outcomes, and it should be based on, using this is going to move the needle for our students. Otherwise, it doesn't deserve a place in the classroom.
Everybody's talking about AI and everybody's talking about all of these things. Like, how do you discern with a young one that we know relationship is important for, scaffold building learning? How do you know how to pick the right technology or that you're using the right thing with children?
I think you look for, and certainly in children-facing technology, you look for what we just talked about. You look for evidence. You look for the possibility of gathering evidence if you want to work together on a pilot basis. And that's the model that we use. We started with a pilot. We made our case that this should work, and then we expanded. And that, working with partners that think that way and are going to be there to support that and want to collect evidence and want to know it's working and want to understand why it's not working for some students. That it's all of that, because it's iterative and it builds. And that's one of the reasons we really pushed at Age of Learning for so many research studies. I mean, just in reading alone, there's 15 studies, and the 15 studies were there because a clear understanding that the context for learning varies. It changes, and it changes at different places. Palm Beach and the ELCs have a unique context, as every you don't run centers. You're a enabler, but you don't decide curriculum. You don't tell the educators what to do in the classroom. You have to bring them along, and you have this incredibly fascinating mixed delivery model of private, public, parochial, and we saw success across all of those. Those that selected to be a part of our work together and used it with fidelity. They saw great gains, and but it's a unique model and it's a different context, and it was some important for us to work towards proving that it could work in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about iteration and you've been doing some of your own, right? You've been iterating yourself. And so at some point, you made this decision to step out and build something of your own. And I want to understand that moment, not just that entrepreneurial leap, but what were you seeing that made you say, I need to build this? What was that gap you couldn't stop thinking about?
The gap that I couldn't stop thinking about is looking at the changes in the reading environment, right? We've had a national movement, 30 plus years now, with the science of reading. We're getting it into policy. Ford has done some great things on the policy level of, micro credentials, for educators. But what we're not seeing is a movement in terms of results. And there's huge investments being made in professional learning, in new curriculum. But why are we not seeing that show up in results? And one of the things that I saw, and it was a lot to do with conversations with Dr. Paige Bullen, who's my co-founder, who's also well known in Florida in context.
Love Page.
Yeah, she's awesome. And just looking at it and saying we're solving for knowledge. We're not solving for capability and capacity and practice. What happens at the last mile? What happens with the student? How do we know? How do we create a system that works? Why are we not investing as much in using technology for adult education? We're talking about educators here. How are we helping them, you know, go from being someone that understands knowledge to being really comfortable and having the mindset of like, I can do this. I know what to do for a child, having that automaticity to do the right thing in a really complex cognitive environment. The great thing about working with Palm Beach was I got to spend time in your schools and got to experience both the loving environment that so many of your educators had created and so many of your centers create, and the enthusiasm of the students there, and also the kind of high cognitive load that exists in one of these centers for an educator. I mean, the idea that you're supposed to understand something complex like the sciences that go into domains like reading, right? These are, it's complex science and it's complex delivery. And then you also have to manage for the cognitive load of that student in front of you. You have to know what they need next, what's going to be most effective. And you're talking about this, in a pre-K classroom, almost 20 kids, and they're all around you and they're running around and you're like, have to have all this focus. And I'm like, I think that what I saw was like, there's a gap in terms of both how we're using technology to enable these educators and provide them what they need so that they can more easily know what to do next. And when they need training, how to pull that down and get that training on that in real time, embedded in their work. And then also like taking care of a lot of the assessment. And it's wonderful that you have, and we benefited it certainly, looking through the data that comes out of Star Early Literacy. But Star Early Literacy is a measurement tool. It's not a instructional tool. And so how do we solve for that? Really, there's a lot of fragmentation and it's not delivered well. And where there's a huge problem, there's a huge opportunity, and one that can both be a great business, but a business that builds out this foundation, and helps our educator architects really deliver the solution they need for each student.
Yeah, I mean, I think the distinction you're drawing is one that most people in this field miss entirely, right? That component of how do you skill build teachers and move theory into practice in a classroom with 20 moving 4-year-olds with varying needs and, varying abilities. What I'm hearing you say, and, I started this whole thing by saying Sunil is my mentor in technology. So he's either going to yell at me or he's going to say, oh, you finally got it. So what I'm hearing is that in this instance, technology isn't really deliberately designed to be the actor. It's really the teachers that's still the actor in this space, right? So
it's a capacity builder. It's an enabler, and that's what we're doing at Mindset CoPilot. Mm-hmm. And with our literacy mindset, it's really focusing the attention on the last mile, the one that's interacting with the student on a day-to-day basis, the one that is going to create the nurturing environment. How do we help them build that capability they need in practice to be effective for their students, reduce their cognitive load so they can spend more of that time focusing on those nurturing skills that are also so important for learning to happen.
So how do you see what you're building at Mindset CoPilot connect to the early childhood space?
It's essential. And just going back to what I was talking about, it is how do we train teachers again to practice, to do what they need to do in the classroom in this cognitive cognitively overloaded environment and focus on what a student needs. I think it's everything from ensuring they have the training and the automaticity uh, to deliver that. And we do that not by just, hey, show up on a Saturday morning for training for 8 hours and you're going to learn everything you need to know. Our solution is grounded in asynchronous modules that really provide adult-centric training. They're very accessible, they're short, they're meant to get to a specific idea really quickly, and then add to that a co-pilot element. It's our mindset guide that can exist in the classroom and provide a diagnostic of the data that of what your students are doing. So this would be, and we're developing this now, is a formative assessment for teachers to administer with their students that then brings back that data into what a teacher needs to do next for that student or that group of students or their classroom based on the data that's live and real of where their students are in terms of their learning trajectory.
That that's really exciting, right? That's really exciting because when what you're really describing to me is strengthening that professional judgment, building relational trust, in that through instructional clarity almost, right? And that really goes to the heart of what we know about how young children actually develop. So if you could imagine what it would look like for a product like Mindset CoPilot, to be in a genuine working relationship with a community-based sort of innovation lab, what would that look like?
Look, I think the way we're building now, which I'm really excited about, is that we're learning as we build. As we build our technology, we're doing professional development and we're building technology that supports what we know about the humans that are going to use our technology. We're assessing where teachers are in terms of their knowledge base. When I say assessing, this is not to evaluate them, is
Right.
to understand where they are with their abilities. We're doing that in two ways. We're providing a practice diagnostic for them to use or to evaluate, like, how are they doing on several of the domains within the science of reading. And then we're using a self-efficacy study to see where is their confidence levels? How do they feel about their own skills? How do they feel about their ability to build those skills? Taking that data, understanding the data, talking to the teacher about it, and you're talking about in a pilot environment, that's exactly what we'd want to do, is that we're building with our customer and with our user, and we're understanding their pain points and then using technology to fill in what they don't have now, but doing it in a way that's considerate of the environment and how much time a teacher has. And it's next to none, So how do we do this in a way that they want to solve these problems? And what can we offload to AI systems? What can we offload to from a processing perspective of data, and then what to do next that is becomes automatic over time, but for the teacher, but it's really hard, and they don't need to necessarily be doing that.
Yeah.
That is a great function for data, or for an AI system, and the function of the teacher then is to implement, effectively and make those choices in real time that understand the environment, understand the student, understand if they're sick, if they're tired, if they're not ready for this, they just want to sit in a corner and be quiet. Like, those are critical to have, the teacher being able to diagnose, because technology can never do that.
Yeah.
And that is for the human in the room to do. But ours is to enable that human to do when that child is ready to learn, to do what is going to be most effective next.
I want to get big picture with you because of what you just said for a moment, because I think you're probably one of the few people I know positioned to answer this honestly. We're living in a moment where AI is everywhere, and the early childhood workforce is scared, excited, confused, maybe all three at the same time. Well, what do you say to a childcare director or teacher who is really wondering where technology is coming from, what it will do for her, you know, what do you say to that childcare director who's generally wondering about technology and her space in early learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. What would I say to her? I would say to her, there's no reason for you to trust us. We don't have that we're going to do anything good or bad. Yeah, you don't know. So ask the question. Ask me why do I think this is going to work? Why do we think this is going to work? What evidence do you have that's going to work? How is it going to help my students? How is it going to help my educators? How is it going to help my center be more effective? What are you going to do for my business to be successful, which is dependent on these educators, which is dependent on these kids? And if what we would tell them is that we're going to see a place where, and we're going to use technology where the humans in your center thrive. And that and we're going to get there. We may not know how to get there today, but we're going to get there because that is our goal, to work with you together to get there. And if we have it, here's the evidence of what we have from before. This is what the science informs us should work. Let's go figure this out. Let's go make this work. Let's deliver on the promise of what early learning can be and should be, not just for the people in the building, but for the parents, in terms of how do we extend to them when they don't communicate the same language necessarily their students are being taught in, or their children are being taught in. Like there's this opportunity to really bring everybody in the ecosystem of learning together with the focus on that individual child, and what can we do collectively to ensure that they reach the potential they were born with.
Decades of evidence has told us, right, that teacher-child relationship is not really just a nice to have, right? It's a durable skill. And it is the instructional mechanism for young ones. And so how children regulate, how they build trust, how they develop curiosity, that sense of themselves as learners, all of those things, right? So as AI becomes more, I guess I dare say, embedded in early learning environments, I guess what I worry about is maybe that we start optimizing for interaction and quietly eroding the relationship piece. We stop optimizing for that. What does that look like?
I look at it differently. I think we can optimize for interaction, which will unleash the relationship piece. Because if you reduce the cognitive load of what it takes from delivering the right academics, I mean, the looking at reading in particular, or specifically, it is really the science is very clear. We as humans are not born to be readers. Oral language is a natural skill. Reading is not. It takes effort to rewire the brain so that a young child can read. And therefore, that there's real science there that needs to be attended to. But that science also requires knowing a lot about a lot of different domains within reading, for an early educator who is also managing everything else that's going on in the classroom. So if we relieve some of the load from that, and open up the opportunity to say you do this in context of the child, and you do this in context of understanding the child's own cognitive limitations and cognitive load they're facing. So the child is going to grow to trust the educator more, because the educator is going to understand from a science perspective when to stop, when one more instructional unit is too much, when that child is not ready. And that will create trust between the child and the student and the teacher and the child. It's not because the child can't do that. They might just not be able to do it right now. And in that environment, that is something that is a teacher alone, that educator alone in that environment can diagnose that.
Yeah. So if you guys were ever a fly on the wall to hear Sunil and I argue incessantly and have rounds and rounds of conversations between how children learn, and me just rolling my eyes. And when he would say relationship is not part of it, he has come a long way, people. He has come a long way. He has finally landed his plane. And though I would want to attribute all of this to my rounds and rounds of argument, I know it had more to do with Isabel Howe and her book, Love to Learn, than anything else. So I'll give her that piece. You know, you've got problems with that sort of stuff.
It's not that I have problems with it. Well, I mean, the difficulty is when you see the standalones there and there's no measurement about like how you,
Absolutely.
like it is, we're trying to be, as scientists, we need to look at how which is the science, is being moved. It's not my science. It's not, your science. It is
Absolutely.
science,
It
and
is.
science is, so when you use some of the softer skills, it's like, well, what are we doing? Where are we going to see those efforts, and how do we know what efforts are going to be most effective? So what measures are there for that? And that's why, I tend to lean to the quantitative. The qualitative is fine, and I think that's really useful. But look, we're solving big infrastructure problem, and quant is quantitative measures and looking at what's moving the needle are really important.
Well, I mean, to your point, no doubt, no doubt without the measurements that we were able to have in Palm Beach County to really talk about how early learning moved was really the thing that people are looking at, right? Before that, it was always, that, well, we hope and we pray and we cross our fingers and hope that everything we're doing readies children for learning. But we know, you talked about the ecosystem earlier, and we know that there are so many things in that ecosystem that can derail a child's learning, no matter how great the relationship might be for the 540 hours that child is in a VPK classroom, right?
Hmm.
And so definitely it's more a middle of the road conversation that it's on either side. And I would venture to say more and more as I look at it, I recognize the need for evidence, right? And the need to prove the point of learning for children. And to that point, when we started thinking about learning in Palm Beach County, our goal of 100% readiness by 2030, right? When I say that number out loud, some people are inspired. Some people think I've lost my mind. Where do you land on goals like that? Ambitious, maybe, uncomfortable goals? What do you think it actually takes to get us there?
Yeah, I love goals, and I love bold, aggressive goals like that. And you look at the policy environment in Florida, you set yourselves up for it. I mean, House Bill 438 came along and said, look, we're going to start assessing in childhood, in early childhood, in VPK settings with start early literacy. We're going to measure. That means once you put a measurement in place, means okay, we care about that. We care that that's important. We care about kindergarten readiness, and we want to see improvement on against that measure. You introduced a lot of professional development and training and such also for educators. So it wasn't just here's accountability, go figure it out. It's like here's accountability and let's invest in it. Those are two important things. Where we're falling short is at the classroom level in terms of really looking at how do we bridge that gap from learning knowledge to learning practice. And so what's working, science of reading legislation is moving the right direction. Hope to see continued investment in Florida in terms of like, let's get better, let's get better. Florida was unique with your Chamber of Commerce. The business community awareness is there, it's growing, it's a pillar. I mean, third grade reading, kindergarten readiness, both are there. Where we're falling short is a micro credential doesn't mean what happens on Monday morning between an educator and a 4-year-old is actually changing in the classroom. It just means the educator passed something that says they have some knowledge. In Florida and like elsewhere, assessment and instruction, completely different systems. They're disconnected. And we saw that in the data. You saw it with your interactions. Educators get their STAR data. Yes, they have some idea where their students are and where they might, but it doesn't change, between the benchmarks, fall, winter, spring. It doesn't inform practice. Screeners tell us who is struggling, but they don't tell what practice to change tomorrow, what I can do better to help these kids. Teachers are being asked to close that gap alone and without continuous feedback, without coaching, without real-time decision support. And so 2030 is a solvable problem. I mean, it's not, it's, you know, it's, and that's why I want to build what we're building, is because it is a solvable problem. The field isn't losing teachers because of the work is meaningful, but it's just, there's a lack of support infrastructure that can be built, should be built, and will be built, that will move the needle. And that structural gap, we just need to see investment moving to understanding that and looking at the data and pushing for things that are going to move that needle. Aruna, that 30% gap, as we looked at your data, isn't a mystery. We know which students are in that 30% who are not achieving proficiency. We also know that something fails in between when they take the spring assessment and their kindergarten assessment in fall. There's something happening in the summer. We know that's happening. So the question is, are we going to fund the infrastructure to bridge those gaps? Because they're bridgeable.
What an amazing conversation, right? What an amazing conversation. It's great to reinforce that, these crazy goals that we have, it's achievable, and if people see it that way.
It's not a crazy goal. It's the right goal. It's the right goal. It's the right goal. There's nothing crazy about it.
My last question would be, what is one thing, because you have to reach back to early learning, because I believe, and we all believe, and we know that early learning is the foundation to everything we do. So think about something that you have brought with you from your early learning days that you still use as a foundational piece today.
It's funny because of the analytics and such that I really focus on, and I think about my own early learning and my own environment, and outside of early learning, I'm a migrant to the country, and like many stories like this, my parents left for the U.S. I was before I did, and I was a child, and I haven't really thought about this until recently, that I was so fortunate, because I didn't know at that time why my parents left. They just left me. What the heck? Where are they going? I'm a toddler.
I can think of many reasons, by the way, but okay.
Yeah, sure. But I was a toddler. They're leaving. But I was so fortunate to have the aunties and uncles and grandparents and a nuclear family, and just be surrounded by so much support and love of my family and my community, that which unfortunately is not universal for everyone. And so, looking back, you recognize that that environment provided me the opportunity to learn, and was critical for my having the confidence and the ability and the persistence and a lot of the who I've become now really started because of that place I came from, and that's somewhere I hold really special. And I think that's how do we, with public systems, ensure, like, you can't replicate a nuclear family, but you can certainly create an environment that nurtures something similar and creates community for a student, where they feel loved and given the opportunity to learn and flourish.
Sunil, this conversation has been everything I hoped it would be, and then some. We waited a long time for it. And so for listeners who want to learn more, you can find Sunil's work at mindsetcopilot.com. Did I get that right?
Mindsetcopilot.com. That is correct.
Okay. And for those of you thinking about what the next chapter of innovation and early learning could look like, right here in Palm Beach County, stay tuned, because what we talk about today is just the beginning of a bigger story. Thank you so much for being here. This was an amazing conversation, and I look forward to learning more about Mindset CoPilot.
Thank you, Aruna, and thank you for the opportunity to realize what's possible, because it really does take a partnership attitude that looks toward, like, how do we move something? How do we not do what's always been done or what's conventional? How do we do things that are actually going to move the needle for our children?